All right, well, we're going to start off in 17. We kind of left off here last week and finished this chapter. We're in 39 of Genesis.
What verse?
17?
Oh, all right.
Actually, we'll just start with 16 because that's in the middle of the sentence. So, then she laid up his garment by her until her master came home, and she told him that the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in and laughed at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that Joseph was in charge of, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." So we kind of left off in verse 17, and she told the story saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to laugh at me." And I think we brought out the fact that she told, in the earlier statement, when she told her servants that came to the house, they laughed at us, trying to get them involved. And now she's talking to Potiphar, telling him that they laughed at me. So she's kind of changed that. And I think this is because she knows that her husband approves of him. And if she would say she laughed at us, he would know. He's not laughing at me, Potiphar.
Yeah.
And he's not mocking us. He's always been faithful in what he's doing. So I think that's why she probably changed that word there to kind of, not clue him in to anything. Okay. And one of the things that I want to bring out here is we notice that Joseph was stripped of his garments.
Yeah.
Okay. And he was accused of mocking. But Joseph pictures Jesus, doesn't he? And Jesus was stripped of his garments and mocked. So, remember when they took his robe off and hit him on the head and said, "Hail, King of the Jews"? They're mocking him. Okay. You guys see anything else in this verse 17? Something else I saw is "whom you have brought among us." She's accusing Potiphar of bringing this Hebrew in here, and he's mocking us. Okay, this reminds us of Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve was confronted with their sin, and Adam's like saying, "This woman you gave me, she's the one that got me to eat this fruit you told me not to eat." And then the woman blamed the serpent. So the blame game's going on, and that's what I see here in this verse 2, "the servant whom you brought in among us." All right, verse 18 and 19. "But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled." You guys see anything here? You notice? Huh?
It sounded like, maybe it's just me, but it sounded like he heard the story prior to his wife telling him.
Okay, why do you say that?
Well, and she told him the story. And I'm back up in here in 19.
Okay. He said, she said, "This is the way your servant treated me." Notice that she's saying your servant.
Yeah.
She's not saying our servant. He took care of the house. He took care of the house she was in.
Everything.
Everything. She didn't have to worry about anything either because of him. Okay? So I think it's ironic she's not calling him our servant, he's calling him your servant. Kind of reminds me of some people who have kids. And when
Your kids. Your kid did this.
Yeah, when your kid does something wrong, he's your kid. Well, guess what happens when he does something right?
Oh,
Our kid.
our good angels.
He's our or my kid. Yeah, isn't that sad? Poor kid. Man. But that happens. That happens.
And not necessarily kids neither.
Yeah.
Your car broke down.
Yeah. All right. So what does this tell us? You know, here's something I pulled out of this. We're God's children. But you know, if we do something wrong, he's never going to disown us. He's never going to disclaim us. We will always be his children, even if we do something wrong. And he's going to forgive us when we ask for it. We can depend on that. Okay. Ask David. We know what David went through. God didn't disown him. He should have been put to death, right? For what he did. So we can rest in these promises that God has given us. That's what's going to get us through the trials, through the hard times. When God says something, it's a promise, and it won't fail. And when he says, I'll never leave you or forsake you, he won't. Even if you do something wrong. So, did Joseph do anything wrong?
No, he didn't do nothing wrong.
No, he didn't. And I don't see one sin recorded in all of the story of Joseph in the Bible everywhere. I don't see anything that he done wrong. We can pick out David. We can pick out, Noah. We can pick out Moses, and we can see things that they did wrong. They're not perfect. They're human beings, just like everybody else.
Why they put him in prison then?
Because they accused him of trying to sleep with Potiphar's wife.
Oh, okay.
But it was a lie. Okay. Now, it says, the last part of that says his anger was kindled. His anger was kindled with who? Doesn't say, does it? Okay. Anger was kindled. Does anybody know where that verse, where those phrases come in play in the Bible again later? Anybody know someone that anger was kindled with? All right, well, how about Moses? In Exodus 13 and 14, it says, but he said, O Lord, oh my Lord, please send someone else. This is when he's at the burning bush. God says, you're going to go get my people out of Egypt. He says, send somebody else. Then the Lord was kindled against Moses. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he's coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he'll be glad in his heart. So in this story, Aaron's coming out to see him. God already orchestrated that. He's already on his way to meet you. And he's angry with Moses because Moses didn't want to go talk to Pharaoh. He didn't think he spoke well. And, God said, well, who made your mouth? So.
And then Moses struck the rock twice instead of once.
Yep, later he did. That was one of his sins, wasn't it? That it kept him out of seeing the promised land or going into the promised land. He saw it. But, what I think is being pictured here with the anger kindled, Potiphar's anger was kindled, and he's not naming a name. He's not saying with his wife or with Joseph. His anger was kindled. I think this is probably picturing God's anger with our sin. He's displeased with our sin. He's not displeased with us. He's not going to disown us. But I think that he's angry with the sin, and he's not naming us specifically. So, if you remember Jesus, it said God bruised him, and he wasn't angry with his son, but he took the judgment out on him that we were due. Okay, he did everything the Father commanded, didn't he? But yet he said, let this cup pass from me. Not my will, yours be done. So I think he was probably angry with the deception that was going on. And I think he knew that. And I think we'll see that in the next chapter, that he knew his wife was being deceptive. Okay. God does these little things by not naming things, just so that we'll see what he wants us to see and ask why these things happen. Why did that happen? Why did he say this? Why did they do this? Okay, verse 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. So prison is Beit HaSafar, and it means roundhouse. And usually, I think, did I show you guys these last week? The roundhouse? Okay, well, now we're going to look at it. By the way these are described in the commentaries, it reminded me of a place that when I went to Israel, the guide took us to called Beit Kruvim, and it means strong house or house of the strong man. But I think it means strong house. And what they do is they start digging in the dirt, and then as they're digging, they get wider and wider, and it ends up looking like a bell. When they get down there, it's just a big bell, like this. And that's what it looks
Got
like.
that picture?
Yeah.
Can't get out of that thing.
But what this is, I asked, well, why would they do this? Build their houses like this or whatever? And he said, well, this is cheaper, number one, and it's stronger. I mean, here you're kind of like in a cave, and it's a strong house, and you don't have to cut wood and build up. You just go down, and it's cooler. It's underground, so it's cooler. But this is what I believe is kind of being pictured for us in this word Beit Safar, is a roundhouse. Now think about this. If they did this in Egypt, which they did do this, whether this is actually what Joseph was in or not, I'm not 100% sure. But there's only one way in and out.
Yeah.
So you've got to have somebody on the top get you in and out of there, either with a rope or a ladder or something, if they didn't have any exits
It
to
looked
it.
like it'd be warmer in the wintertime.
Yeah, it would be warmer in the wintertime too. So, and just think about it. Well, we'll think about this here in a minute, and I'll bring it up. Well, think about it. If you had prisoners in there, would you have to have them on chains?
No.
Would you have to have them handcuffed? No. You just throw them in there and let them run around. Okay, they're not going anywhere. They can't get out of there. So keep that in mind, because that'll come up here in a little bit. Okay, now we see that, where was this place? It was where the king's prisoners were confined. Okay, and we're going to see this when we get to the cupbearer and the butler, because they were the king's caretakers, and they end up in prison with Joseph. Okay, so this is a specific. This is kind of like having a prison for the White House, if you will, or people that are close to your government officials or whatever. Pharaoh, this is Pharaoh's prison.
I
Okay.
was trying to
Who's
Peace.
the warden?
piece when the gates flew open and the prisoners came out.
Yeah,
I'm trying to picture that with this, and this don't have no bars or nothing on it, so.
no, but you know, you're bringing in something here. This is actually tied to this. Joseph going into the ground, into the pit, is a picture of him being dead and buried in the pit and going and setting the captives free, going down and preaching to the captives. And when he rose on the third day, he set the captives free. That's what this is picturing in this story. And for your answer, who was the warden? The warden was Potiphar. He was the chief of the prisoners. He was the chief, what do they call him? I forgot what the name was. The chief, anyway, he was the one in Kendall, the chief executioner. He's the one that made sure these people were executed that needed to be executed.
Warden?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was the warden. Okay. And if Potiphar was the chief executioner and his anger was kindled, why didn't he execute Joseph? I think this is a clue that he knew that Joseph wasn't the problem, but he had to do something about it. He had to take care of the deception and the sin, and Joseph took it for us. That's a picture of Jesus taking our sin, going to the grave with our sin. Okay.
Mine says the Lord made Joseph favor with the prisoner warden.
Yep. He gained favor with him, didn't he? And I think this is Potiphar. Based on the next story we get into, I think it kind of shows us that it was actually Potiphar. So I think what kind of happened in the way I'm reading the story is that Potiphar was angry. He had to do something, so he took Joseph and put him in prison. But he knew Joseph, and I think he put him in the head because he still maintained his integrity there, and he made him head of the prison ward too, took care of everything. So anyway, Joseph actually is being punished for something that Potiphar's wife did. He didn't do it. She accused him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's deceptive. Okay, you see who that's picturing? Huh?
What'd you say?
You see who Potiphar's wife is picturing?
Yeah.
Is picturing us. We're the one that sinned, and Jesus is the one that went to prison and paid for it in the grave. We never saw that before, have we? We never would have put ourselves in Potiphar's wife's spot and said we're the ones that have sinned and brought this upon Joseph. But we're the ones that sinned and brought our sin upon Jesus. Okay. And he bears our guilt. And I want to bring up again, just like what Bob was saying earlier, that this kind of pictures Jesus going into the grave, preaching to the captives that were held there, and then they were set free. And there's something going on with the butler and cupbearer we're going to see in the next chapter. But that's what's being pictured here. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Well, if God was with Joseph in the pit, then God the Father would be with Jesus in the grave, right? You know, and we say that, my God, why have you forsaken me? He forsook him. And I don't think that's right. I think that Jesus was, God was with Jesus. The Father was with Jesus during this time. And I think he's bringing out the fact that it was a fulfillment of Psalms 22, where that's coming from. So Psalms 16:10 says, "For you will not abandon my soul in Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption." And that's what happened to Jesus. You know, he wasn't abandoned. Joseph is going to be raised and placed in charge of the Father's kingdom, Pharaoh's kingdom. Okay, we're going to see that here coming up. He's going to be brought out of the pit, lifted out of that pit, and put in charge of Pharaoh's kingdom. Everything under his authority except Pharaoh. Revelation 2:26 and 27 says, "The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over all nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. As when earthen pots are broken in pieces, even as myself I have received authority from my Father." So everything on heaven and earth is put in charge under Jesus' care by the Father. And that's just going to be pictured when Joseph is pulled out of the pit. Everything's going to be put in his charge in Egypt. Verse 22, "And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it." You guys see anything here? You know, like I was saying earlier, we need to be content knowing God is with us. He'll never forsake us. He'll never leave us. And we need to realize that even through our trials and our tribulations, God is with us through them. And we just need to be the best person that we can be in the predicament we're in. Whether we're a slave, whether we're a servant, whether we're free, we just need to be a good representative of the kingdom we now live in, right? Okay. Joseph was put in charge of all the prison. And if we're with him, we're going to be ruling with him in the next kingdom, right? Verse 23, "The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that Joseph was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." So the keeper had no worries about Joseph being in charge. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Joseph was focused on God, and God blessed him whatever he did. This is kind of reflected in Isaiah 53, 9-12. It says, "And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth." You see how that pictures Joseph? "Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hands." See, everything Joseph touched prospered. "Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong." This is the strong house, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. So this is all being pictured in Isaiah 53, which is another what Jesus would bring up at the cross, and what he's picturing there is being brought out here too. These are symbolic. So Joseph is picturing Jesus' death, being put in the grave in the pit in this story. But he's going to be raised here coming up next chapter. Okay? So let's go to the next chapter. Any comments on this one before we go to the next one? Okay. I might have another picture here. There, were in that cave, and I thought that was really cool. The light was shining through in a little sunbeam, and I had somebody take my picture underneath that because that was kind of cool.
You know, it'd be the only light that would be coming in is through that hole up there.
Yep.
When it got dark, it was dark.
Yeah.
There's no light shining across the street or something.
That's right. Let me see. Yeah, I'll just read the whole thing. All right, so we're in chapter 40, verse 1. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. And one night they both had a dream, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in his prison, each his own dream, and each dream with his own interpretation. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and the vine there was 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And then Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me this kindness to mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." And when chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "Well, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. On the 3rd day, which is Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted them, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, forgot him." So, verse 1. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And this verse kind of helped me see that this is different than verse 2. And I think there's something going on here. It says the cupbearer, and that word is maske, and king of Egypt means double distress, or at least distresses. Baker is fe hiope, and it means and to bake. So if you read this in the Hebrew, it says later king, cupbearer, and baker, or and to bake, send to Lord, to king of double distress. Now you can see why they translate this into English, because that would be very hard to read and understand. But the point I'm wanting you to see here is what I'm seeing, the way it's reading in Hebrew. I think this is showing us that this is one person in this verse. He's both the cupbearer and the baker. Now, why would you have 2 people taking care of your food? Why would you have somebody just taking care of your drink and somebody just taking care of your food? I would think that you would have, one guy that did that. Made sure your food and drink was being taken care of. But just the way this is worded in Hebrew, I think it clued me into what I needed to know to understand what's going on here. And it says that they committed an offense. What offense do you think they committed? What was their jobs?
Not tasting the food or not drinking that wine.
Okay. We can assume, we don't know, but we can assume that maybe Pharaoh got sick and got really deathly sick, and he realized it was something that he ate or drank. So guess who he's going to take his revenge out on? The cupbearer and the baker. They were supposed to be the ones to make sure he didn't have bad food. So that is an assumption that's put on there just based on their jobs and why they'd get thrown in prison, but we don't know that, okay? So once again, what I am seeing in this verse is this may be picturing one person by the way it's worded, okay?
Well, they got their master there is a plural, isn't it? Their master, that means there's more than just one person involved.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let me dig that up because that's a good question. Okay. Yep, you are right. Adonenhem. So that is a plural third person. So you would be right, Bob. That is showing that is there. It's plural master. But what I was focusing on that helped me see this, and I still think God's trying to show us here that this is one person, and I'll show you why here in the next verses. The cupbearer is Maskeh. You see, it's singular. Okay, and it doesn't say the cupbearer, and it says and hafeh, to cook, to bake. So ve haope is to cook and to bake, and it's also singular. So we translate that and baker, but if you read it by what I'm seeing in the definitions, it says later Melech is king, cupbearer, and to cook or to bake. So it's like the cupbearer is the one that cooks and bakes also. So anyway, don't get sidetracked with this. I'm just saying that this is what kind of helped me see that this is one person. You're going to see this in the next verse, okay? So just keep that in mind.
You brought that up. I'm trying to put things together. The cupbearer actually made the food for the king, or he just tastes the food for the king?
I think he's the one that took care of everything. I think he's the one that got it. He made sure that the king's food and drink were not contaminated. So whoever brought it, okay, he had to trust the people that brought it.
Yeah.
Or he went out in the king's garden every day and got this stuff himself. Either way, he was the one responsible for this. So even if the king's garden was depleted or, you know, he would have got an animal from somewhere else. When he would prepare the food, he would make sure it wasn't contaminated, because if somebody just brought something in and said, here, you know, give this to the king,
Yeah.
it wouldn't happen. If something like that did, he would have to taste it and see if it had poison in it before the king got it. And I tried to look up some of this online, and I couldn't find anything that was helping me with what was going on with cupbearer and baker, and whether you can have two different ones. I couldn't find anything to help me make that decision.
Then, verse 2, it says he was angry with his two officers.
Yep.
Now, was an officer one of the cupbearers?
Yep, the cupbearer and the baker. So here in this verse, you do have two. The way the first verse was reading, it kind of implied to me when it said, you know, the cupbearer and to bake or to cook. It doesn't say and the baker in Hebrew. Otherwise it would say ve. Well, actually it does say ve. All right, well, I might have to backtrack on that, but this still makes the point you're going to see here coming up. Okay, Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Okay, he's showing you here that there's two, and it is plural, and he's making them separate, and he adds the word here that wasn't in verse 1, chief cupbearer and chief baker. That word sar is not in the verse above, in verse 1. Sar is not there. If you notice, it says sometime after this, the cupbearer and his baker. It doesn't say chief cupbearer and his chief baker, okay? But here in this verse it does, so it's showing you that they are chiefs. Okay, verse 3, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. Now, in the last chapter, we found out that Potiphar was the captain of the guard. So, if he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in prison, who is in charge? I think this is showing us as Potiphar. Okay. Huh?
Joseph is captain of the guard?
No, captain of the guard is, I think, Potiphar. And this is showing me and helping me understand that I think Potiphar, who was in charge of this, captain of the guard, did not put him to death for what he was accused of because he knew Joseph. So I think he took him from his house and put him in the prison and let him work there because he knew that everything he'd do would prosper. He didn't have to worry about anything. So I think it's Potiphar. It could be somebody else. I think it's Potiphar. And it says he was confined. It doesn't say he was chained or anything like that. He was confined. So that kind of leads me to believe that picture of the Beit Ruvin house is probably more of what's going on. They threw him in a pit. He can walk around freely and do what he needed to do, but he couldn't escape. Okay. Verse 4, the captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. So the captain of the guard put Joseph in charge. And this is why I'm saying I think it's Potiphar.
Yeah.
And who is Joseph picturing? Joseph is a type of Christ. He's picturing Jesus being thrown into the pit. And Joseph is in charge of everybody in the pit. He's in charge of the prison. when Jesus is thrown into the pit, he's in charge of the prison, the captives, isn't he? And he's in charge of us. Okay, verse 5. And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king, who were confined in prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. So they both dreamed the same night. It says one night they both dreamed. So God gave them these dreams, and they both have similarities, but they're both different. Okay. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. And this shows that Joseph was free to move, that he wasn't chained. He was able to walk around. He came to them in the morning, and he saw that they were sophim, angry. Now, how would he know this? Why would he know they were angry?
Well, it could be the attitude.
Okay. In order to know someone is angry or someone has a different disposition about them, you would have to have spent time with them, have known what they're normally like, right?
She tells me that when I get angry, I must be hungry.
So she probably knows you better than you know yourself. All right. And that's what I think's going on here. I think Pharaoh spent enough time with them that he knew them and knew that something was bothering him. Verse 7, it says, so he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, why are your faces downcast today? Okay, this actually translates into Hebrew. It says, why are your faces evil today? That's what it says in Hebrew. Madua, Penakim, Rahim, Hayom. Verse 8, and they said to him, we have had dreams and there's no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell me your dream. So they're basically saying that we had these dreams down here in prison. We got no one to ask. If they were out of prison, who would they be able to ask? Yeah, Potiphar's magicians or soothsayers or diviners or whoever they are, they would have had access to them. They don't have access to them in prison. Joseph is letting them know that dreams come from God. And if God gave you these dreams, he can give you the interpretation. Okay? God would not give you a dream that he wanted you to know about without an interpretation. Okay? It'd be a contradiction to his nature, I mean. He would be doing something that he would be wanting you to do something that you didn't know how to do or what to do or explain. Okay? And Joseph says, please tell them to me. I think this is implying that he knew he can understand God. God would lead him in what he needed to do. And if God wanted him to interpret this dream, God could make that happen. So, verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream there was a vine before me. So here the cupbearer goes first. And he sees a vine, Geffen. Remember when we were at Passover, one of the words one of the prayers that we recite is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagefen. That's the vine. Okay, and this shows that he was the one that prepares the cup for Pharaoh and makes the wine. What scripture comes to mind when I say vine? And that word vine comes into play. What is a scripture that you guys remember? I know you know. How about I am the vine?
Yeah, I was reading that there. when they mentioned vine, I guess there's no other vine other than grapes that they were talking about.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
So there's,
The grapevine.
you
Okay.
just,
Okay, so let me read you John 15, 5-7, which is where this is. I am the vine, you are the branches.
yeah,
Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it'll be done for you. So this is kind of giving us a clue of how to understand these two people. Okay, so the cupbearer possesses the vine. All right, verse 10. And on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Now, how did he see that? It was a dream, number 1. Number 2, he saw all this happen at one time.
well, in a dream, time passes faster than
That's right. And in real life, it takes time for...
It's there, and it just jumps like in the future on some things.
Uh-huh.
And this is what I think they're talking about here, is that there's a vine, and then they bloomed, and there's grapes produced, so it was just a short time period.
And it takes months for that to happen in real time, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Months for it to sprout flowers, bud, blossom, put clusters on the vine. So, it's kind of like, this reminds me of time-lapse photography. You guys ever used to see that stuff like on National Geographic? You can set a camera down there and you'll see a little seed sprout come up, and then it'll come up, and then all of a sudden it'll be flopping in the wind, and the flower will bloom, and it'll go back down and die. All in like 60 seconds.
yeah.
Well, that took days,
Yeah.
for that to happen. Well, anybody remember something else in Scripture that budded and put forth blossoms? Aaron's staff.
Big tree maybe?
Okay. I don't remember a fig tree doing it overnight. Okay, let's go to verse 11. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. So this shows that he was the cupbearer of Pharaoh, putting the cup in his hand. Verse 12, then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Where have we heard 3 days before? On the 3rd day, resurrection.
When Jesus comes back,
That's right, when Jesus rose from the dead. So that's the tie here of what's going on. And you got to remember the big picture, little picture, because there's another picture in here. So if you got the little picture of 3 days, 3 literal days, you have a resurrection, you're coming out of the grave. Jesus comes out of the grave. Then if you take that and you make the big picture out of it, what is 3 days on the big picture? 1,000 years. A day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. So if you've got 3 millennial days on the 3rd day, the 3rd millennial day is when I believe we will come out of the grave, when our bodies go into the grave. So anyway, verse 13. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. So it says, he will lift up your head. I think this is showing that he'll be lifted up out of that pit, that hole in the ground, the grave. And what day?
On the 3rd day.
On the 3rd day. He will restore you. Hasibeka. back to its original position, back to where you were in the kingdom, your position that you had before. You're going to be restored back to that. 14, only remember me when it's well with you, and please do me this kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. And notice that Joseph doesn't say, if this happens. If this really happens, remember me. He says, when it is well with you. When this happens, it's going to happen.
And he's describing the dream that it will happen. You just gotta wait till the time to get there.
Right. And when it does, remember me. Get me out of here. All right. 15, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit. And this pit is Sohar, and it means roundhouse, the pit. But this pit, that's what we were using earlier, if you remember, when Joseph was thrown into the pit, into the prison, in Potiphar's prison. Here, he's saying, I was thrown into this pit, and this word is bore. And that's what's used for the grave, the pit. So that's what this story is telling you. It's telling you that he was in prison, and this prison is picturing the grave, the pit, because he's using this word. It's the same word that when he was sold by his brothers, and they threw him in the pit, it was bore. And then he was lifted out. That's a picture of the resurrection. It's tying it back to that, so you'll understand. Okay, so Joseph was put in the pit by his brothers, lifted out, resurrection, and now Jesus is spending this time with us in the time of the Gentiles. Jesus was lifted out of the pit, and he's going into the time of the Gentiles. You see what that's picturing? Joseph is sold into Egypt, and he's spending time in Egypt now with the Gentiles. But when Jesus is lifted out of the pit, he's spending time with us, the time of the Gentiles. That's what that's picturing. So we are in that time right now, before his brothers come and recognize Joseph for who he is, before the Jews recognize Jesus for who he is. We're in this time frame right now, in this picture, in this story. All right, verse 16. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, well, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head. So he saw that the dream was favorable for this guy. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you my dream and see what my favorable explanation is. Okay, and in the uppermost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. So, what do you guys see in this verse?
Feeding the 5,000.
Huh, okay. All right. So, he is supposed to be giving this to who? He had 3 cake baskets on my head, and he's supposed to be giving this bread to Pharaoh, right? But the birds come and eat it up. Well, remember when Abraham was offering the offerings, and he cut the offerings up, and then what came around and was trying to eat the offerings? What did he do with them? He shoot them away, didn't he? Get out of here. Well, this guy doesn't do that. He just lets them eat it. So when he goes before Pharaoh, he's not going to have anything. They're going to eat up all the bread. All right. 18, and Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. Okay, this word, it says lift head off you. Okay, the other one didn't say off. He was going to lift up your head and you're going to go before Pharaoh. This one is lift up your head from you or off of you. Okay, and hang you on a tree. Ve tala. Al ace. And hang on tree. Okay, verse 13. If you go back up in verse 13, we'll see that guy, when his head was lifted, it was to restore him. This guy in verse 19, he's going to lift your head above, over, upon, or against you and hang you on a tree. See the difference? The cupbearer gets restored to his position. He has something to give the Pharaoh. The cup. This guy doesn't have anything to show. He let the birds eat it. And he doesn't have anything to give the Pharaoh. He's not going to be restored. Okay, let me pull some of this together. Josephus says that this guy was actually crucified. Whether he was or not, I don't know. Josephus says that this guy was crucified. But within these dreams, we see life and death. We see one guy is restored back to life, one guy is not. He's dead. And notice that God confirms all of his dreams. Whenever you see dreams in the scripture so far, he's always confirmed them with two. You know, Joseph had two dreams. You know, one of the sheaves bowing and one of the stars. And then you have what other dreams were there? But every time there's a dream, he confirms it with two dreams. And this one here, there are two guys that have their own personal dreams, but they're kind of the same, have the same tenets and stuff to it. So that is helping me see that from verse 1, when it looked like there was just one guy, this is showing us that this is one person, that it's the decision that you're going to make. Are you going to be presented before Pharaoh alive, or are you going to be presented before Pharaoh dead? I think this is the spiritual death being pictured here. Are you spiritually going to be alive or spiritually deaf? And this is why I think in verse 1 that looked like one person with two roles, cupbearer and butler, but in verse 2 you had two people. Well, we are two parts, aren't we? We're a physical and a spiritual. And the cupbearer pictures the two natures, okay? The physical and spiritual. And we're either going to be in Christ or we're going to be in the devil. We're either going to be in life, the vine, or we're going to be in the devil, Satan. And we're going to go before Pharaoh with a gift that we're supposed to be giving him, wine, the true vine. We're either going to have the true vine tied to us when we get to Pharaoh, when we get to God, Jesus, or we're not. We're going to allow the tenets of this world to take our rewards, or what we're supposed to give God as a gift and give back to him. We're going to let the birds eat it. We're not going to have anything to show. Okay, I'm going to stop here. We're in verse 20, and we'll go ahead and pick up here and finish this off next week.